Hello everyone, and welcome to UFO Enigma. I'm Ron Rickey, your host. Now on today's show, I'm going to finish up on the article that I had just started on the last show, and that was a pretty interesting little sighting and supposed abduction that happened in Cardiff, Wales. And upon doing this article here, this will show that UFO activity is still very heavy in the British Isles. And then on the last past few weeks or so, different people have asked me if I could go over some of the various contactees who have told their stories over and over again over the past 50 years or so. And although I have touched on many of these people while reporting on their sightings and whatever, it wouldn't really hurt to go over a few of the major names, and there's more than a few. Well, I find the unending lineup of good UFO contact and sightings that just keep cropping up every day. There's a new one. There's just as many people out there who only now are just learning, really the fundamentals of UFOs and the contacts and what the whole thing is all about. And they want to find out some of the basic background about the subject, which is only natural. And since I have been studying the subject and collecting material since about 1959, I'm only too willing to share what I have learned in these past years, and we'll hit some of those contact stories, and then if time permits I'll start another report on an article of a more modern sighting. But for then, here goes. We'll do the Cardiff sighting first. Now this sort of blends in pretty good with the contactee part later on, because this is an abduction case also. And the story is out of the Wales on Sunday of Cardiff, Wales. The date line was September 18th of 1994. The headline reads, "Aliens Kidnapped Me in a Spaceship." Now the story is about the abduction that took place about 9 years ago, so this story is late in coming out. The individual's name is David Thomas, which isn't his real name according to the article. And the incident led to a new UFO book by Mr. Thomas recalling this whole experience. And I'm just sort of wondering, to go to one side here, that if it's going to be under his assumed name or if it's going to be under his real name. That'll be interesting to find out. This book will deal with close encounters of the fourth kind and alien abductions, so I imagine it's going to run the gamut here of the storyline. And the article didn't mention too much about what's going to be in the book. They just mentioned that it was going to be one in there. Now, here's how the incident happened. Mr. Thomas lived and still lives in the town of, it's a real hard one, Paul Hilly, Gwynedd in Wales. I hope I'm saying that right. And he was driving home early one morning when he noticed a humming sound from a roadside pasture. He said it sounded like the hum of a generator. Now, we've gone over that many times, and that sound is very common in UFO sightings. So now he stopped the car, and he got out, and he proceeded to walk down sort of a muddy footpath to investigate closely. And that's when Mr. Thomas was snatched up by the aliens he mentioned in the article here and whisked away aboard their UFO. At first, Mr. Thomas recalled that he was grabbed by the shoulder by the alien and led through a gap in the hedges. I guess there was a hedgerow, which is common in that part of the British Isles. And it was right on the edge of the field. Kind of an eerie feeling, just thinking about it. So now Thomas claimed that the alien didn't have the friendly features of, say, E.T. And they were more like, this was an interesting observation on his part, they were more like the aliens out of the 50s horror movies, he claimed in the article. Now, he got a pretty good description here of what they wore: an octagonal helmet, gray suits, gold belts and straps, and black boots and gloves. Quite a fancy sounding outfit for these fellas. Now, he also got a pretty nice description here of the UFO. He said it was being about 20 feet high. That's a pretty good sized ship. It was domed at the top, and it was disc-shaped and had antenna or stabilizing units sticking out of it on the side. Then there was a window and a drawbridge type door in the front. Now this sort of reminds me of something right out of the 50s science fiction flicks. I'll take for instance The Day the Earth Stood Still, when Michael Rennie landed that ship down and the thing just sort of slid out, sort of like a drawbridge. That's what really made me think of it. Now once aboard this ship, he could see, now this was fast now. Whether there's some kind of a time differentiation here, but I don't know. But once he was aboard, he could see the planets, Jupiter, Saturn, whizzing by before they docked with a much bigger mothership. Now, Thomas said he was given a physical, and the aliens asked him if they could take his eyes. This was kind of a really strange part of the story. If they could take his eyes for further examination, and of course he refused. I guess any abductee would. Now he claims that these people told him they were from a planet beyond the constellation Lyra. Now they breathed pure oxygen and disliked the kind of air that we have here right now, that we're getting, you know, the pollution and stuff like that, and it didn't agree with their systems too well. They questioned him about quite a bit on the UFO, the USA. Now, this is interesting, questioning a man from Wales about events in the USA and NASA, as they had captured a Voyager probe. Now, and I didn't put this in, this is what the article is, before dumping him back on Earth, they told him they would be back for him. And the thing took off, and later on he was found reeling by the roadside by a passing policeman who took him home. He didn't even take him to the station or anything, he just took him to his own home. Now, a local UFO investigator, Philip Mantell, told the reporter that this case was one of the most convincing that he had ever heard. And I'll tell you, it had plenty of facts and figures. He said the incident has left him rather, Thomas that is, the incident has left him rather frightened and apprehensive, especially since they did tell him that they would be back. And it went on to say that Mr. Thomas says he suffers from nightmares and is worried about his health because he probably can't sleep and it's affecting him. Now, one good thing did come out of this, though. Thomas did claim that it totally changed his life. Now, since meeting these people, he's developed talents for music, poetry, and he is now an avid campaigner for the Greenpeace type issues. And I thought this was a pretty good story. In fact, I really thought that it sort of matched up with the contactees out of the 50s, especially the early 50s, which we're going to head to now. And it had a lot of the same flavor and a lot of the same information, especially the trip through space and the planets whizzing by. And we'll keep this particular one in mind. And as we go on to the next part here with the contactees. Okay, now most of the information on contactees can be found in a variety of books. I have all kinds of magazines and hardcover books and from guys that wrote their own first-hand accounts, such as Communion and things like that, Interrupted Journey, to books like the UFO Encyclopedia, which I picked a lot of thumbnail stuff out. I have gotten a lot of this, like I said, thumbnail information from the UFO Encyclopedia. Very, very excellent book. It was compiled and edited by a noted UFO author, John Spencer. Spencer's done awful lot of work. And as I said before, I've gone over some of these contactee stories in detail on past shows. But I thought, it would be a little bit of fun to mention them. Let's get them all together now, especially if I can sort of correlate them in the 50s and then work them up. Okay, we can go back to, before we get, to the modern contactees, we can go back centuries to the Bible, Ezekiel, Moses, other people in the Bible. A lot of researchers claim that these are actually UFO sightings, stories, and stories of contacts. We can go back to contacts from people in ancient Rome. We can go back to the famous airship sightings that I covered extensively back in 1896 and 1897. I didn't cover them then, but that's when they took place. But let's just more or less deal with some of the contactees from the modern era, and as you know, that would be from Kenneth Arnold's sighting on up. It's approximately 50 years. Okay, now here's a partial list here. I know we're not going to get through all of them, but we can do as we go along here. Here's a partial list here of a bunch of these people who claim at least one contact with aliens, and in many, many cases, lots of contacts. Okay, now first I'll sort of list them, and I'll give you, later on I'll give you a short description of their encounters. And the ones that I sort of picked out for this show were George Adamski, who I've done many shows on. Then we have Orfeo Angelucci, Daniel Fry, Betty and Barney Hill, Mr. Anders, all it was just one name, Jose Alvaro, Cedric Allingham, Betty Andreasen, Cynthia Appleton, Antonio Villas Boas, Whitley Stryber, and Ed Walters. If you remember correctly, I've done a lot of shows on the modern sightings. Ed Walters would be one of your modern contactees. Okay, now there's a lot more who have claimed contacts and even abduction by UFOs and by these people. But let's give a little account of the ones I just mentioned now, because I know, time permitting, I'm not going to be able to take care of all the ones here that I've mentioned. So to begin with here, like I said, I've gone over a lot of these things, so if it sounds a little familiar to some of you, just bear with us for a while here. The first one we're going to do is George Adamski. I think he would be, if you would want to say Elvis Presley was the introduction of rock and roll, George Adamski would probably be the introduction of contactee stories. Okay, now, George Adamski came on the scene in 1953 when he published his book, Flying Saucers Have Landed. And in this book, Adamski told of how he'd been sighting UFOs since 1946, and told of his first meeting with an alien in 1952 in the Desert Center, California area. Now, Adamski referred to himself on a lot of articles here as professor, but a lot of people do say that it's quite unsure of where or if or how he even acquired this title. Much Much was made of Adamski's connection with the telescope complex at Mount Palomar, but in doing research, the stories that I heard that he just worked at a cafe there as a cook. Now, Adamski claimed contact with a friendly alien, and this man was who said he was from Venus. Now, he also claimed he was invited. Now, we'll try to get this. Remember the last story, Mr. Thomas there from Wales. Adamski also claimed he was invited into a flying saucer, and many of them, as a matter of fact, and given rides to and from the far reaches of our solar system. In general, Adamski's claims were written off mainly as flights of fancy. But in my research, I read a lot of things that Adamski described. Now, he described things that would happen on a flight through the atmosphere, say when a ship is taking off to go into outer space. And these things weren't proven until some 9 or 10 years later, when our Mercury astronauts started to do their famous Mercury flights into spatial history. They mentioned little firefly-type things outside their window when the Mercury astronauts went up, and George Adamski mentioned the same things many years earlier. So whether he was guessing, we don't know. And but it does put George Adamski in a special place in the contactee story. So let's get together now here. We'll try to get these 50s guys together. And the next one would be Orfeo Angelucci. Now, Angelucci was one of, a bunch of people who were supposedly contacted and a lot of times abducted or invited aboard a UFO. And these men all followed close on the heels of George Adamski's 1952 release. Now, Angelucci also wrote a book, and this was titled Secret of the Saucers. Now, these books that I'm mentioning are probably out of print, and the only way, I don't even have some of these, and you'd probably have to go to a real UFO library to even get a look at them. I don't even know if you could own something of these anymore. But we have here The Secret of the Saucers, and it tells of his various meeting with the extraterrestrials. Angelucci supposedly had many enlightening encounters with these people, boarded a flying saucer, and was flown around the solar system again. Note the similarity. Adamski flown into the solar system, the man from Wales flown around, given a little ride around the thing. To them, that's probably a 10-minute ride around the solar system. Okay, now Mr. Angelucci also said that he had met these people in some very common places, such as cafes, a bus station once, etc., you know, everyday type of things. And here's where it gets a little far-fetched in the thumbnail sketch of his life here. He also went on to say that he once met Jesus, who said he revealed himself to be an extraterrestrial. Now, to top all this off, he said that while being taken for a ride to the extraterrestrials' distant planet, he met a very attractive woman named Lyra. And she told Angelucci that he was himself once an extraterrestrial by the name of Neptune. I was a little bit skeptical on this particular one, and I sort of said, you know, I have the feeling here that Angelucci wasn't the only one here being taken for a ride, but who knows? Okay, that takes care of him. Now, this sort of following right along, this would probably be another couple years later. We come to Daniel Fry. Fry was another in a long line, followed Angelucci and Adamski. So in 1954, he wrote a book called The White Sands Incident. Now, this interests me because White Sands is a missile test site. And to this, just this fact that the title of his book, it gives, to me anyway, a little more credibility. Who knows the circumstances way back in '54, but let's just go along with it. His book told of how Fry was working at the White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico when he saw a huge flying saucer land nearby. Now you have to listen to this very careful because there's a little tie-in here I'd like to make. He walked over to the ship and was just about to touch the hull, and a voice from within the ship said, "Better not touch the hull, pal, it's still hot." He said later on, now, it was not then, but later he was contacted by an alien who called himself A-Lan, that was A-L-A-N, and who later changed it to Alan. So whether that's just to make it simpler to remember his name, I don't know. Now, Fry was then conducted for a standard tour of the flying saucer and given a quick dash around the solar system, and which pretty much resembled what the other two men said, the other three men. But what gets me in this particular one, I gotta say, the location, New Mexico, and the year 1954 lend themselves very closely to when the Roswell story broke. Don't forget now, we're talking White Sands, New Mexico, and we're talking Roswell, New Mexico. We're talking 1954 when Frank Scully broke the story. So, you know, we got a nice little package forming here. And I have to add a little bit now. If a lot of people say that the U.S. did obtain a functioning copy of a flying saucer from that Roswell incident. And I had to say that the slangy way the saucer pilot warned Fry not to touch the hull, pal. I mean, that sounds kind of American. It don't sound like it comes from Mars, you know what I mean? It sounds like one of our guys was flying this thing. The little question in this package that we're starting to form here is, did Fry stumble upon an early test of this captured Roswell saucer? The story never went on that far, but to me it's sort of an interesting thought, and you know, it just makes you think. Okay, now, well, that was '54. Now, a few years later here, we have another contactee who came to the front. This was in 1957, to be exact. Now, this took place in England, and it was a woman contactee, and her name was Cynthia Appleton. She was a housewife in Birmingham. Okay, now, the story, the little sketch that I've read on it was, though no UFO was observed physically, a figure of a man just materialized in Mrs. Appleton's living room. The description of the man made him sound a lot like the Venusian that George Adamski befriended. He was a tall, blonde-haired man with pale complexion and elongated features. Now, during the 4 contacts with Mrs. Appleton, the alien imparted much information. We're talking 1957 here now. She received lots of information from this guy that was way beyond even talking the technology of that particular day. He was so far ahead. In other words, he was giving her information that our top scientists and England's didn't even know about, or only just starting to play around with. They gave some of the stuff that he told her, and some of this information was, she said it was giving on what she would call, in today's words, a hologram. And she was told such things as the nature of complex atomic structures. Now we're talking Einstein-type stuff here. She probably really didn't even know what the guy was talking about. He mentioned laser beams, and he also mentioned cancer cures that involved frequency modulation. Now you might be just starting to hear some of that now, and this is many, many years after that sighting. Okay, the man even left which was a little bit gross, but you know, he left a little bit of physical evidence of himself by burning the tip of his finger and leaving a small amount of skin in a bowl of water. Now, some of this skin here was taken to a lab and it was analyzed, and the results were quite interesting. The lab scientists claimed that the skin more resembled animal tissue than human tissue. And all in all, hers I thought was quite an interesting contact. For one thing, it didn't involve the standard flying saucer coming down and the guy being taken to the moon or whatever. This was just something that happened in her house. This is one here that not all, it's all not that well known either. If you want to find out about this one, you have to dig into a specialized book like I have, and mainly because, or perhaps because it happened in England, and at that time the UFOs were running rampant here in the United States. And that sort of takes care of Mrs. Appleton's story. And let's get on to the next pair here, and this will be Betty and Barney Hill. Now, I've spent lots of time on Betty and Barney Hill, and I know I'm not going to be able to finish it up, but let's talk about it a few minutes anyway. The Hills this was a very interesting case, and a very, very important contactee case. They were an interracial couple who lived in New Hampshire. As the story went, they were returning home from a holiday time in Canada, and as they were driving, they spotted a light that seemed to be pacing the car. This was in 1961. Now, as the reports were being made, it was found out that a radar contact was made at the Pease Air Force Base in the exact vicinity of the Hills where they were at that time and when they reported this, and at the same time. The events of the sighting they first reported were as the UFO got closer, they stopped to get a better look at it. Through binoculars, the object to be a structured vehicle and with various colored flashing lights on it. They then continued on, and as they went along, the UFO seemed to be much closer, and I'm not going to be able to finish this, but just in the last minute, the story that they told of the UFO sighting was just a nice UFO sighting. But as the years went along, they were bothered by nightmares. They were constantly agitated, and they went to Boston to get some therapy. Dr. Simon regressed them. The first story was absolutely just the tip of the iceberg, because when they dug into their minds, the story was one of the kings of the contactee stories. And on the next show, we'll just continue on with it. And in the meantime, just keep looking for them UFOs. They're probably out there somewhere. Bye-bye.